Watch how he moves, low, patient, close to the earth, a hunter who has done this 10,000 times before. The bison in front of him is bigger than a car, all muscle and horn, an animal that could break every bone in his body with a single turn. He does not hesitate. He closes the distance that no modern human would ever dare, drives the spear in with the strength of his whole thick, powerful frame, and rides the animal down into the snow. This is not a weakling. This is not some failed rough draft of humanity. This is a Neanderthal, a human being from a lineage that had already survived in this brutal cold for 300,000 years. That is longer than our own kind has even existed. They were not the losers of history. They were the masters of a world that would kill you or me in a single week. And yet you are here, watching this, alive, and they are gone, every last one of them. This is the story of how a world ends, told, for once, not from our side of it. Told from inside the eyes of the humans who were here long before us. His name in our story is Dorn, and he is old. Old for a Neanderthal, which means his body is a written record of a hard life, thick bone, old breaks that healed crooked, muscle worn down by decade after decade of killing enormous animals up close with his hands. To understand what is happening to Dorn and to his kind, you first have to understand what his people truly were. Because almost everything you were taught about them is wrong. Forget the shambling, grunting brute of the old cartoons. Neanderthals had brains as large as ours, and in some cases measurably larger. They made complex tools. They controlled fire. They hunted the most dangerous game on the entire continent and mostly won. They cared for their sick and their injured. They buried at least some of their dead. Their bodies were engineered for the cold itself, barrel-chested, short-limbed, heavily muscled, compact, built to hold precious heat where a long, lean modern human would simply freeze to death. And they had owned Europe for 300,000 years. Truly sit with that span because our minds are not built for it. Great empires last a few centuries. Our entire written history is only a few thousand years long. The Neanderthals endured as the undisputed masters of this land for 300,000 years, through ice age after ice age, through cold that descended and lifted and descended again, over and over. They watched the great glaciers advance and retreat more times than anyone could count. They buried more winters than there are days in your life. And they survived every single one. These were not fragile creatures, waiting nervously to be replaced by something better. These were, by any honest measure, the toughest human beings who have ever lived. They knew this land better than we ever could. Every valley, every game trail, every cave and spring and river crossing was written into them across 10,000 generations of living and dying here. They had a fire in their hands and a spear that had brought down mammoth and rhinoceros and cave bear. They were not simply surviving this world. They had, in every sense that matters, conquered it, which is exactly what makes their ending so hard and so haunting to understand. If not weakness, then what? What could possibly finish off a people this strong, on ground this thoroughly their own? Dorn walks. And the walking itself is what tells him that something has gone terribly wrong. Not a single dramatic catastrophe, not a flood, not a fire, not a monster on the ridge. Something quieter than any of those, and in the end far worse. There used to be other people here. When Dorn was young, this land held other bands of his own kind. Never many Neanderthals were always thinly spread across the cold, but they were out there, and you knew it. You would cross their trails in the snow. You would find their old fires still faintly warm. You would meet them on the open ground, trade a young person to join their band or yours, share news of where the herds were moving, and part again. That was how his people had always survived, not as one great crowded tribe, but as a loose, wide web of small bands, scattered across the land and connected to one another by the thinnest of living threads. But now Dorn walks the old valleys, the ones that raised him, and he finds them empty. A hearth gone cold with no one left to relight it. A cave that should hold a band, holding only silence and old bones. A trail in the snow that leads out toward nothing and simply ends. The web is coming apart in his hands, strand by strand, and he can feel it happening. His own band is smaller than it was a decade ago. The faces gathered around his fire at night are fewer and older, and there are not enough young ones. And we know now from reading the genes locked inside their fossil bones that Dorn is right to be afraid. By this point in their long history, the Neanderthals had dwindled to exactly these scattered handfuls. Their populations had grown so small, so isolated, so cut off from one another across the empty land that their own DNA carries the unmistakable strain of it. Inbreeding written plainly into their genomes. The genetic signature of a people who were, slowly and quietly, running out of one another. And then Dorn finds a sign that is not empty, and in its way it is worse than empty. It is new. a hearth, but not shaped the way his people shape a hearth. Tools left scattered on the ground, but not napped the way his own hands and his father's hands and 1,000 generations of hands know how to nap stone. These are thinner, longer, made on a logic he does not recognize. Someone else is here. Someone who is not his kind and not the old, familiar kind of stranger either. Something genuinely, deeply other. These are the newcomers, our kind. Modern humans spreading up out of the warm south into this cold continent, taller than Dorn and leaner and above all many. And here we have to be honest because the truth is stranger and sadder than the story we usually tell. We do not need to imagine a great war, armies of one humankind slaughtering the other. The newcomers may have fought Dorn's people very little or hardly at all. They simply arrived. And spread and used the same valleys and hunted the same herds and needed the same caves and the same food and the same warmth. In a hard land that could only ever feed so many mouths, every mouth the newcomers brought was, in the cold arithmetic of survival, a mouthful taken from someone like Dorn, and the newcomers kept coming. In numbers that Dorn's scattered, dwindling, inbred people could never hope to match, no matter how strong each one of them was. We even know now that the two kinds of humans sometimes met and did not fight at all, that sometimes they mixed and had children together, because their blood still runs, faintly, in ours. But the arithmetic underneath it all was merciless. A people growing and a people shrinking, forced to share a single cold world that was, very soon, about to get much, much harder, and time itself was against Dorn now. The bones tell us that the Neanderthals disappeared from Europe somewhere between roughly 44 and 40,000 years ago, the final flicker of a fire that had burned for 300 millennia. Dorn is standing inside that last flicker without knowing it. He does not know he is one of the last. He only knows that the valleys are emptier every year, and the strangers' fires are more numerous, and the winters seem to bite a little deeper each time. He has no word for extinction. No way to see the whole shape of what is happening to his kind from the inside. He only feels it the way you feel a season turning, the slow, wrong sense that the world is closing in, because now the sky itself turns against them. Far to the south, near what is now the Bay of Naples, the ground splits open. We call it the Campanian Ignimbrite, the largest volcanic eruption Europe had seen in some 200,000 years, roughly 40,000 years ago. A blast on a scale nothing living had witnessed. It threw so much ash so high into the air that it drifted down across more than 3 million square kilometers of Europe, an entire continent dusted in gray. That ash settled in a layer so wide and so even that today, 40,000 years later, archaeologists use it as a single marker line in the earth, one gray band that lets them date sites across the whole of Europe at once. That is how enormous this eruption was. For Dorn, hundreds of miles from the volcano itself, there is no fire and no flowing lava. There is only the sky going quietly, terribly wrong. The sun dims to a pale disk. A fine grit begins to settle on the snow, on the grass, on the surface of the water, on everything. The winter, which was already hard, gets harder. The plants that the herds depend on are dusted and fouled and poisoned. The herds thin. And when the herds thin, people like Dorn begin to starve. This is exactly where the old story used to end, with the volcano as the executioner. The great eruption that wiped out the Neanderthals in one apocalyptic stroke. A clean, dramatic, satisfying ending. But the honest science tells us something more complicated than that, and in a way, something far more tragic. And Dorn's people, who owned the cold for 300,000 years, deserve the honest version of their own ending. There's even a real question of timing that complicates the clean story. Some of the most careful dating suggests the last Neanderthals may have already been gone from parts of Europe by the time the volcano actually blew, which would mean the eruption did not push the first domino at all. It fell on a world where, in many places, the Neanderthals had already quietly slipped away. The truth is blurry and the scientists still argue over the exact order of it, but the shape of the answer is clear enough, and it is not the shape of a single killing blow. Here is the truth as carefully as we can tell it. The eruption was terrible, there is no doubt about that, but careful scientific modeling has shown that on its own, it was probably not enough to kill the Neanderthals. The very worst of the cold and the ash largely missed the western heartland, where many of the last Neanderthals still clung on. Some studies even suggest that regions like the Iberian Peninsula may have sheltered them for a while longer, not less. So the volcano did not swing the killing axe. It was something more like the last hard shove against a people who were already falling, already teetering on the very edge. Because by the time the sky turned to ash, the Neanderthals were already reduced to those scattered handfuls, already inbred, already stretched too thin, across too much cold and empty land, with far too few of one another left to hold the web together. They had survived every earlier ice age for one simple reason. There had always been enough of them, spread widely enough that some band somewhere could always hold on and repopulate the rest. But now there were not enough. Each band that winked out in the dark was a strand that could never be replaced. Each brutal winter took a few more. Each newcomer camp crowded them a little further into the barren margins. And the great eruption was simply one more crushing weight laid onto the shoulders of a people who could no longer carry any weight at all. The straw, not the sword. They did not lose to a stronger, smarter species in some grand and glorious contest. There was no final battle on a hilltop, no last stand. There was nothing so dignified and nothing so cruel. They ran out of room. They ran out of numbers, they ran out of each other. And slowly, quietly, family by family and fire by fire, across thousands of years, they ran out of tomorrows. And this is the part that should make us gentle with them rather than triumphant over them. There was no moment of defeat they could have fought their way out of, no enemy to outhunt, no winter to outlast, no cave to outhold. You cannot outmuscle arithmetic, you cannot spear a shrinking number. All their strength, all their hard-won mastery of this brutal land was useless against the one thing that was actually killing them. There were simply too few of them left, spread too thin to go on. The strongest humans who ever lived were undone not by anything they could see coming, but by a slow, silent, invisible math. So here, at the very end of it all, is Dorn old and alone, or very nearly so. Perhaps his band is down to him and 2 or 3 others now. Perhaps by the end it is only him. We do not know, but we will let him keep his dignity because his people earned every scrap of it. Picture one last hunt. The old strength is still there in those scarred arms. He tracks the way he has always tracked. He closes the distance the way no modern human would dare. And he makes one more clean, powerful kill in the same way his people have killed for 300,000 years. Picture one last fire, built exactly the way his mother built fires and her mother before her, back and back and back beyond the reach of any memory. He is not pathetic. He is not a stupid brute who simply deserved to be replaced by something better. He is the final custodian of an entire way of being human, one that lasted longer than our own has, and that is about to end forever in the snow with him. Everything his people ever learned, every song they may have sung, every word of whatever language they spoke, every story told around 300,000 years of fires, all of it is about to go out with this one old man and leave no one behind who remembers. When his fire finally goes cold, something goes cold with it that can never, ever be lit again. A whole kind of human mind. A whole way of seeing and surviving this world, extinguished. They did not lose to a stronger species. They ran out of tomorrows. But here is the part that should stop you exactly where you stand. They are not entirely gone. Because when the newcomers and the Neanderthals met, they did not always fight. Sometimes they loved, and they had children together. And those children had children. And those children walk the whole earth today. Which means that if your ancestors ever passed through Europe or Asia, you are carrying Dorn's people inside you right now in this very moment. About 2% of your DNA is theirs, so look at your own hands, really look at them. Some small part of what you are, some faint flicker of Dorn, of the people who owned the cold for 300,000 years and then quietly ran out of tomorrows, is still here. Still walking, still warm, still winning in a way, one bloodline at a time. That 2% is not nothing. It is in the immune systems that fight off our infections, in the way some of us handle cold, in traits scientists are still untangling today. Dorn's people, quietly at work inside billions of living bodies, tens of thousands of years after the last of them died alone in the snow. They did not entirely end. They became, in a small and silent and permanent way, us.